"I don't need your sympathy," Lila said. "I need work. Can you give me that or not?" The man across from her didn't answer right away. He looked at her, the way you look at something you weren't expecting to find carefully, like it might matter. Then he said 4 words that changed the entire direction of her life. "I need a wife." She had ridden 6 miles on a borrowed horse, with blistered hands and a stomach that had given up complaining. She had not ridden 6 miles for a husband. She had ridden 6 miles to survive. And yet something in the way he said it, plain without apology, like a man stating a fact about weather, made her ask the only question that mattered. What does it pay? If this story already has you leaning forward, hit subscribe right now and follow this all the way to the end, because Lila's story is one you do not want to leave in the middle. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. She had 3 days left on the only roof she'd ever known when she decided that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The farm had been her father's before it was anyone's built. With his hands maintained by his stubbornness, kept alive through 3 droughts and 2 bad winters, by the particular determination of a man who believed that the land would eventually reward the people who refused to leave it. For 22 years, Daniel Everett had been right. And then he hadn't been. And then he was gone, and Lila stood in the kitchen of a house that was no longer hers, and looked at a letter from the bank that said what she already knew: that debt doesn't grieve with you, and creditors don't wait for the funeral to be over before they start counting. She had not cried when the collector came. She had asked him 2 questions, how much and how long, and when he gave her the answers, she had nodded and closed the door, and sat down at the kitchen table and thought for 4 straight hours. Crying was for when there were no more decisions to make. There were still decisions. On the 2nd day she had gone to town, not for comfort, for information. She talked to the woman at the general store, the man at the feed supply, the postmaster's wife who knew everything about everyone and had no particular policy about sharing it. She asked each of them the same question: who in this territory was hiring, and what for, and was the work honest? Most of what she heard was useless. 2 leads came to nothing before noon. The 3rd came from the storekeeper's wife, a woman named Agnes, who had the particular energy of someone who had lived long enough to skip the parts of conversation that didn't matter. "Troy Blackthorn's ranch," Agnes said, not quite looking at her. "Out past the eastern ridge. He's been needing help." "What kind of help?" She paused, folding a bolt of calico with more attention than it required. "I couldn't say exactly, but he pays what he owes and he doesn't make trouble." "Is there anything else I should know?" Lila asked. Agnes looked at her then, with the direct assessing look of a woman taking someone's measure. Whatever she found in Lila's face seemed to satisfy her. "He's had a hard few years," Agnes said. "Don't let the quiet fool you. There's more going on at that ranch than most people know." She handed Lila the folded calico she hadn't asked for. "Take this. You'll need pockets." Lila put the calico in her bag and rode east before noon. The road to Blackthorn Ranch was longer than she'd been told, which she'd been prepared for. People in frontier country always underestimated distances the way they underestimated winters, out of a loyalty to optimism that the land itself never rewarded. She had time to think which was the one resource she had in abundance. She thought about her father, not about losing him. She'd been doing that for 3 weeks, and she understood by now that grief didn't resolve on a schedule, that it simply became something you carried differently as time went on. She thought about him specifically, about the way he used to say that a person's character was visible in how they handled the 2 extremes, the best of times and the worst. She thought he would have been uncomfortable with what she was doing, riding toward a stranger's ranch, with nothing but a name and a desperate need. But she also thought he would have understood it. Her father had been a practical man beneath the sentiment. He would have said, "You don't have a choice that isn't a choice, so choose." She chose to keep riding. The ranch appeared around a bend in the road, and her first thought was that it was more substantial than she'd imagined. The kind of place that had been built to last, not to impress. A main house with good bones. Outbuildings that were weathered but sound. Fence lines that went on longer than she could see. A man was at the water trough near the barn. He heard her horse before he turned, and when he did, she had the immediate sense of someone who'd been working hard for a long time and had the kind of stillness that came from it, not laziness, the opposite. The stillness of someone who'd burned through restlessness years ago and come out the other side of it into something steadier. He was younger than she'd expected, early 30s, dark hair, a face that had made its peace with the sun, eyes that moved to her face immediately and stayed there without the quick inventory that some men did, the look her over and categorize that she'd learned to clock and distrust. He just looked at her face. "You lost," he said. "No," she said. "I heard you might be hiring. I'm looking for work." He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet had a quality she couldn't immediately read. Not dismissal, something more like consideration. "Get down," he said. "We should talk." She dismounted. He took the reins from her without being asked and looped them over the fence post, and she noticed that he did it automatically without performance. Just a man who didn't let a horse stand without being secured. Small thing. Told her something. "What kind of work are you looking for?" he said. "Whatever's needed," she said. "I can keep a house manage accounts cook, and I grew up on a farm, so I know what hard work means. I'm not here to be comfortable. I'm here to be useful." He studied her. "Where are you from?" "My father's place was east of Millhaven. He passed 3 weeks ago. The bank took the property." She said it cleanly without asking for anything to attach to it. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for work." Something shifted in his face. Not pity, she was relieved to note. Something more like recognition. He looked away for a moment toward the far end of his property, and she got the sense he was deciding something that he'd already been considering before she arrived. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, "before either of us goes any further." "All right. What I need isn't a housekeeper." He said it looking at her directly. "What I need is a wife, by 6 o'clock this evening." The words landed in the air between them with perfect clarity. She heard them. She understood them. She did not immediately respond because she was a woman who had learned not to react to things before she'd thought them through, and this required thinking. "Explain that," she said. His name was Troy Blackthorne, and he had owned this ranch for 7 years, inherited it at 26 when his father's heart gave out, built it further since, and in all that time had not lost a single acre to anyone. Until now. Until the territorial government's Homestead Verification Act, which required that claim holders meet a list of criteria that included in language, he'd had 8 months to memorize evidence of a stable family household as consistent with productive settlement. In practice, it meant married. "The deadline is today," he said. 6 o'clock. If I don't have a marriage recorded with the county clerk by 6 o'clock, the Claim Review Board has grounds to flag the property. And if they flag it..." He stopped, looked at the fence line again. "There's a man in this county named Radnor who has been trying to take this land for 4 years. If the claim gets flagged, he has grounds to challenge it legally. He's been waiting for exactly that." "And you need a wife to prevent it," Lila said. "Yes." "You don't have one already?" "No." "You don't have a..." She paused. "Is there anyone in town who..." "I've exhausted every reasonable option," he said, and the steadiness in his voice told her that this statement had cost him something, that it was the confession of a man who was accustomed to handling things alone and had reached the specific painful place where alone was no longer sufficient. "You rode up 20 minutes after I ran out of time." She stood with that. "What do you get out of it?" she said. "What does it pay, and what does it require, and what are the terms?" He named the wage. It was honest, more than honest, generous enough to tell her that he was out of options and knew it. He told her she'd have her own room, full access to the ranch kitchen, work that used her skills, a legal standing as co-holder of the property. "Co-holder," she said. "If something happens to me, the land doesn't revert to the government. It stays with you. And if I want to leave? He was quiet for a moment. The claim needs to remain intact for 2 years. A separation within that window could give Radnor grounds to challenge. But the law moves slowly. By the time any challenge could be processed. He paused. I'm not going to trap you here, but I need more than a signature today. I need someone who will actually be present. Lila turned away from him slightly, not to avoid the conversation, to think. She looked at the ranch, at the solid fence lines, at the house that had been built to last. She thought about $11 in her coat hem, and a farm that was already someone else's, and no door in any town she'd tried that had opened wider than a crack. She turned back. I want my own room, she said. You'll have it. I want to see the books, the full financial picture of this operation. He blinked. You want the ledgers. Before I sign anything, I want to know what I'm signing into. If there's debt, I need to know it. If the operation is sound, I need to know that too. She held his eyes. A woman who signs her name to something she doesn't understand has only herself to blame for what comes next. I don't intend to have anyone to blame but myself. Troy Blackthorne looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. I'll have the books on the table when we get back from town. From town, she repeated. We need to be at the clerk's office before 6, he said. It's already past 2. The clerk's office smelled like paper and ink and the particular mustiness of official things, and the man behind the desk, Ferris Dodd, whose name plaque sat at the front of his desk with the self-importance of someone who'd had it engraved, himself looked up at them with the blank efficiency of a man who had processed enough human circumstance to stop finding any of it unusual. Marriage license and record, Troy said. Dodd looked at Lila. You're sure, Miss? I am, she said. You understand the legal nature of what you're signing? I understand legal documents, she said pleasantly. May I have a pen? Dodd slid it across without further inquiry. Troy signed first. Lila took the pen, looked at the line with her name printed beside it. Lila Catherine Everett, and paused. 1 second. Maybe 2. Then she signed. Troy was watching her. She could feel it without looking. The pause had not gone unnoticed. She put the pen down. Is that all? She asked Dodd. You're married, he said in the voice of a man reading weather. Lila looked at the paper, then at Troy. He was looking back at her with an expression she couldn't yet categorize. Not quite relief, not quite anything with a simple name. All right then, she said. Let's go look at those books. Cobb was leaning against the barn wall when they rode back in, and the look on his face when he saw them together was the look of a man whose brain was running a calculation he hadn't been prepared to run. Cobb, Troy said. This is Lila. She's my wife. Cobb removed his hat, looked at Lila, looked at Troy, looked at Lila again. Since, he started. About an hour, Troy said. Cobb turned his hat once in his hands, put it back on. Evening, ma'am, he said with the compressed expression of a man storing an enormous quantity of reaction for a later time. Evening, Lila said. The hinge on the east barn door is dragging. I noticed it on the way in. I'll fix it tomorrow if that suits. Cobb stared at her. The hinge, she said again helpfully. Yes, ma'am, he said slowly. She went into the house to find the ledgers. Yet, they were on the table as promised. 2 volumes and a folder of loose receipts, and she could tell immediately from the way they were arranged carefully but not systematically that someone had been maintaining records with diligence but without training. Troy had the numbers in his head the way ranchers often did. He understood his operation the way a man understands the feel of his own land under his boots. But the ledgers were a translation of that understanding, and translations were imperfect. She made coffee. She opened the first volume. She started reading. Troy sat down across from her without being invited, which she'd expected it was his table, his kitchen, his ledgers, and watched her work with an expression she could feel at the edge of her attention without looking up. "You want to know what I'm finding," she said 40 minutes in. "Yes." "You're not broke," she said. "Your operation is fundamentally sound, but you've been selling your cattle to a buyer named Haskell at roughly 14% below the current market rate, for at least 3 years. Silence. 3 years, he said. Consistent. She turned the ledger toward him and pointed. This is what the county agricultural records show as market rate. I found the reference document in your filing folder. You'd been keeping it without perhaps knowing what to compare it to, and this is what Haskell's been paying. She let him look. The cumulative difference is not insignificant. Troy's face went through something that was controlled, but not entirely controlled, the expression of a man processing something that felt personal even before he understood why. Haskell's been buying from this ranch since my father's time, he said. I know, she said, which is probably why it worked. She paused. Is Haskell connected to Radnor in any way? The question landed with precision. She watched it reach him. His cousin, Troy said very quietly. Haskell is Radnor's cousin. She let that sit without comment for a moment, because some things need to breathe before they can be fully understood. He's been squeezing the ranch from 2 directions at once, Troy said. The legal claim from one side, the cattle prices from the other. Patiently, she said, for 3 years on the financial side, 4 on the legal. He expected one of them to eventually break you. Troy pushed back from the table, stood. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, and she understood that he needed the moment, so she gave it to him, the specific moment that a man needs when he discovers that something he trusted has been a slow blade all along. I need to think, he said. Think, she said. I'll make supper. She got up and went to the stove because supper was useful, and useful things had their own particular dignity, and because giving a man space to process something without an audience was something her father had taught her by example. You didn't have to witness everything. Sometimes the kindest thing was to simply keep the fire going while someone else found their footing. She was 3 minutes into the cooking when Troy spoke from where he was still standing at the window. Why did you pause? He said. She didn't pretend not to understand. When I signed. Yes. She thought about how honest to be, then decided entirely. Because she had a feeling, an early and not yet fully formed feeling, that partial honesty was not going to serve either of them well in this particular arrangement. Because it's the most consequential thing I've done in my life, she said. And I wanted to feel the weight of it before I put my name to it, so that I couldn't pretend later that I didn't know what I was choosing. He was quiet for a long moment. Did it help? He said, feeling the weight first. Yes, she said. It helped. She could hear him turn away from the window, heard him sit back down at the table, heard him pick up the ledger and look at it again. There's something else you should know, he said, about Radnor, about what he's going to do now that he knows I'm married. She kept her eyes on the stove. Tell me. He's going to come here, Troy said. Probably tomorrow. He's going to look at you and decide whether you're a problem or not. And then he's going to figure out how to make you one. What makes him think I'm not already one? She said. The silence that followed had an unexpected quality to it. I'm starting to think, Troy Blackthorne said slowly, that Radnor has made a very significant error in his timing. Lila Everett Blackthorne, now whether she'd fully absorbed that or not, stirred the pot on the stove and did not smile because smiling felt premature. But she thought about it. She thought about it quite seriously. Radnor came at 9 in the morning, which told her he'd been up since before dawn thinking about it. Lila was at the kitchen table with the ledger open and a cup of coffee going cold beside her when she heard the horses. She counted 4 before she stopped counting, because 4 was a statement, not a visit. She closed the ledger, straightened it on the table, and was at the front door before anyone knocked. She opened it herself. The man on horseback was exactly what Troy had described, and exactly what she'd assembled from that description, polished in a way that took effort somewhere around 50. With a face that had practiced warmth so thoroughly, it had almost convinced itself. He looked at her with the quick, categorizing look she'd learned to distrust, and she watched his eyes make their assessment in under 3 seconds. He decided she was manageable. She could see it happen. Good. She preferred being underestimated. It was the most useful position available to a woman with nothing but her wits. "Mrs. Blackthorne," Radnor said with a smile that reached his eyes just slightly too late. "I came to offer my congratulations in person. A marriage that's cause for celebration." "It is," she said. "Troy's in the north pasture. I'll send for him. Would you like to wait inside?" The offer was deliberate. She wanted him in her kitchen on her ground, where she could watch him without the open sky giving him room to perform. He declined, which told her he'd rather stay on his horse, which told her he hadn't decided yet how to handle her. Undecided men made mistakes. She could work with that. Troy came around from the side of the house 2 minutes later. Cobb had gone for him the moment the horses were heard, and the shift in Radnor's posture when Troy appeared was immediate and involuntary. These were 2 men who had been fighting each other for 4 years, and their bodies knew it before their mouths said anything civil. "Radnor," Troy said. "Blackthorne," the smooth voice, the practiced ease. "I was just meeting your wife. Remarkable woman, married in a day. You always did move fast when you needed to." "When the situation calls for it," Troy said. Radnor looked between them with the careful eyes of a man doing math. "The land office will be sending someone to verify the homestead claim status. Routine inspection given the recent changes to your household situation." He let the pause do its work. "I imagine you're aware." "We'll be ready," Lila said. Radnor looked at her. The look had changed, still assessing, but the assessment had been revised slightly upward. She held it without blinking. "The inspector's name is Galt," Radnor said, turning back to Troy. "He's thorough. He'll want to see evidence that the property reflects genuine settlement. A real household." Another pause, lighter this time, almost conversational. "I do hope everything is in order, Blackthorne, for both your sakes." It was a threat assembled entirely from pleasant words, and everyone present understood that. "Everything is in order," Lila said before Troy could answer. "We appreciate your concern. Was there anything else?" Radnor looked at her one more time. Something moved in his expression that wasn't the smile, something flatter and more honest. Then he tipped his hat and turned his horse. They watched him ride out. Cobb appeared at the barn door, watched until the riders were gone, and said to no one in particular, "That man has too many teeth." Troy turned to Lila. "You sent for me." "I wanted you here," she said. "Not because I couldn't handle him alone. Because he needed to see us together." She looked at the empty road. "He came to take our measure. I wanted him to measure something real." Troy was very still for a moment. Then, "You said us." "I said us," she agreed, and went back inside to the ledger. She found the second problem in the books that afternoon, and this one was worse than the cattle pricing. It was buried in the property tax records, a secondary assessment that had been applied to the ranch's water access rights 3 years prior, quietly and without notification, at a rate that didn't match anything in the county's standard schedule she found folded in the back of the filing folder. Someone had created a custom assessment. Someone with access to the county records office. She sat with it for a long time before she said anything. Troy was at the table cleaning a bridle when she pushed the folder toward him. He set down the bridle and read what she pointed to. She watched his face do the thing it did, the controlled, steady thing that was actually underneath it, not controlled at all. "This assessment was never sent to me formally," he said. "No," she said. "It was processed internally and applied as an automatic deduction against the property valuation, which means You've been paying a tax you never knew existed against a valuation that's been artificially suppressed, which would make the ranch look less profitable on paper than it actually is," he said slowly. "If someone were reviewing the property records to determine financial viability," she said, "this would make the operation look marginal, close to failing, which would support an argument that the claim holder lacks the resources to maintain genuine settlement." Troy put the folder down. "Radner has someone in the county assessor's office," he said. "Or had access to someone who does," she said. "The assessment is dated 3 years ago, same year the cattle pricing pattern started." The silence that followed was heavy with the specific weight of a man realizing that what he'd been living as a fight had actually been a siege, that the walls had been being dismantled quietly from multiple directions simultaneously, and he hadn't seen the full picture until someone laid it out flat on his kitchen table. "I've been losing ground for 3 years, Troy said, "and I thought I was holding." "You were holding," she said. "He just hadn't run out of patience yet." Troy looked at her. "How do you know this much about property assessment?" "My father's debt was processed through exactly this kind of mechanism," she said. "Not Radner, just a bank that was very skilled at finding ways to make a small debt look large on paper. I spent the last 8 months of his life watching it happen and not understanding what I was seeing." She met Troy's eyes. "I understand it now." He held her gaze for a moment that was longer than the conversation required. Then he picked up the folder again. "Can we prove this?" "We can document it," she said. "We can show the discrepancy between the standard county schedule and what was applied here. We can show the timeline that it coincides with the beginning of Radner's legal campaign. Proof is harder, but a documented pattern is something." "Something for who?" "For someone in county authority who isn't already in Radner's pocket," she said. "Is there anyone like that?" Troy thought for a moment. "There's a county commissioner named Forsyth. He and Radner have history. Personal. I don't know the details, but there's no love between them." "Then Forsyth is where we start," she said. Troy set the folder down and looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that kept revising something upward. "You've been here one day," he said. "I've been fighting this kind of thing my whole life," she said. "I just didn't always know what to call it." That evening, Cobb knocked on the kitchen doorframe with the careful knock of a man who had made a decision about something and was committed to it. "Can I talk to you both?" he said. They were at the table, Troy with his coffee, Lila with the assessment documents spread in front of her. They looked at Cobb. Cobb came in and sat down in the third chair with the deliberate manner of a man choosing his words before he opened his mouth. "Radner's been moving on the southern fence line," Cobb said. "Not cutting it, not yet. Just riding it. His men 2 or 3 times a week checking for something. I've been watching it for a month and didn't say anything, because I didn't have enough to say." He looked at Lila directly. "I'm saying it now because something's changed." "What's changed?" Troy said. "She's here," Cobb said, simply nodding at Lila. "Radner came this morning, and now he knows there's someone on this property who's been in the books." He paused. "I don't know how he knows that, but the way he looked at her on his way out, that was a man who'd just been surprised. And surprised men move faster." Troy's jaw tightened. Lila set down her pen. "How close are his men getting to the fence line?" "Close enough to check the posts," Cobb said. "Could they be looking for a place to cut?" she said. "Yes," Cobb said. "Before Galt's inspection," she said, thinking out loud. "If there's a fence breach near the water access, it gives Galt grounds to question whether the property is actively maintained." Cobb looked at Troy. Troy looked at Lila. The three of them sat with the shape of it for a moment. "I start riding the south line morning and evening," Cobb said. "Document everything I find." "Write it down," Lila said. "Date, time, location, exactly what you observe. Sign it. I want a record that Forsyth can look at." Cobb blinked once at being directed by the woman who had arrived yesterday. Then he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He stood. "One more thing." He looked at Troy with the expression of someone delivering news they'd been carrying a while. "Haskell came by last month, said he was thinking about adjusting the contract terms this fall. Wanted to lower the per-head rate again." "How much lower?" Troy said. Cobb told him. Troy's expression didn't change, but his hands on the table did a small controlled tightening. "Tell Haskell," Lila said, before Troy could respond, "that we're reviewing the contract and will be in touch." Cobb looked at her. "Just like that." "Just like that," she said. "Don't say no. Don't say yes. Give him nothing to report back." Cobb's mouth moved in the direction of a smile without quite completing it. He went back to the bunkhouse. The kitchen was quiet. "You don't want Haskell to know we've found the pattern," Troy said. "If Haskell tells Radnor we know about the pricing, Radnor changes his approach," she said. "Right now our advantage is that he still thinks this is a ranch in financial trouble with a desperate new wife who doesn't know what she's looking at." She tapped the assessment document. "Let him keep thinking that while we build the record." Troy was quiet for a moment. "You're very patient for a woman who came here with nothing." "I came here with everything I needed," she said. "I just had to figure out where to apply it." He looked at her across the table in the lamplight, and there was something in that look that she didn't catalog deliberately, didn't catalog because it was too early for that kind of notation, and she was a woman who kept her books clean. "Get some sleep," she said. "Forsyth's office opens at 8. I want to be there by 9. Commissioner Gerald Forsyth was a precise man in his 60s who received them with the careful cordiality of someone who had learned to take his time about trust. He had white hair and the hands of a man who had spent his life at a desk, and his eyes did the same tallying thing that Pruitt's had done, patient adding things up. He looked at Lila the moment they walked in. "Mrs. Blackthorne," he said, "I'd heard you'd arrived." "I imagine a lot of people have heard," she said pleasantly. "We hoped you had a few minutes." He had an hour. He gave it willingly, once Troy laid the ledger on his desk, and Lila laid the assessment document beside it, and she walked him through the timeline with the same methodical clarity she'd have used explaining a crop rotation to a skeptical neighbor. Not dramatic, not accusatory, just numbers, dates, and the pattern they drew when you placed them in sequence. Forsyth listened without interrupting. He picked up the assessment document and read it twice. He looked at the cattle pricing comparison for a long time. "The assessment irregularity," he said finally. "You're saying this was processed without formal notification." "Without any notification," Lila said. "There's no record of a notice being issued. I checked the correspondence folder going back 4 years. An assessment applied without notification isn't legal," Forsyth said. "No," she agreed. "It's not." Forsyth looked at Troy. "You didn't know." "I didn't know what I was paying or why," Troy said. "I knew the numbers were tight. I didn't know they were being made tight on purpose." Forsyth set the document down. He was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who is deciding something rather than simply thinking. "Galt arrives next week," he said. "We know," Lila said. "If I file a formal inquiry into the assessment irregularity before Galt's visit," Forsyth said almost to himself, "it creates a county-level record that any report Galt files would have to be weighed against." He looked at Lila directly. "That's what you're here for." "We're here to show you what we found," she said carefully. "What you do with it is your authority, not ours." Forsyth looked at her for a long moment. Then he almost smiled, brief, restrained, genuine. "You've been here 2 days, Mrs. Blackthorne." "Yes," she said. "Radnor has been working on this county for 15 years. "I know," she said. "But he's been working on it one piece at a time, and he's never had anyone lay all the pieces on the same table before." She met Forsyth's eyes. "It looks different all at once, doesn't it?" Forsyth looked at the documents on his desk. He picked up the assessment paper one more time. "I'll need to keep these." "Copies," Lila said, and produced them from her coat without being asked. Forsyth looked at the copies, then at her. "You prepared copies before you came." "Yesterday evening," she said, "before the storm." He took the copies and placed them with deliberate care at the center of his desk. "I'll have something filed before end of week," he said. "That's all I can promise." "That's enough," Troy said. They stood to leave. Forsyth stood with them, which was a courtesy he clearly didn't extend automatically. At the door, he said not to Troy, to Lila, "Your father. He was a farmer." She looked at him, slightly surprised. "He was." "Shame," Forsyth said. "Talent like yours is wasted on crops." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and they went out into the cold morning air together, Troy's shoulder close to hers, on the narrow porch steps. "He's going to file," Troy said when they were far enough from the door. "Yes," she said. "How did you know he would—" She thought about it. "Because he's a man who doesn't like being shown that something wrong happened on his watch," she said. "That's not guilt. That's pride in the useful sense, the kind that makes a person fix things, because the alternative is living with having known about them and done nothing." She paused. "My father was the same way." Troy was quiet for a moment. "You talk about him like he's still giving you advice." "He is," she said simply. "That's what it means to raise someone well. They carry you forward with them." They walked to the horses. He helped her mount without being asked and without making a production of it, just a hand available at exactly the right moment there and then gone. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, precisely and without making anything of it. But she noticed it. The storm came 3 days before Galt's visit, and it came fast. Lila was at the south fence with Cobb documenting the latest bootprint evidence near the water post when the sky went from overcast to serious in under 20 minutes. Cobb looked up, looked at her and said, "Barn," with no additional elaboration, because no additional elaboration was needed. They moved fast, but not fast enough. The rain hit while they were still 200 yards from the barn, and by the time they pushed through the door, they were both soaked through, and the wind outside had become something with opinions. Troy was already inside. He'd seen it coming from the north pasture and beaten them back by minutes. He had 2 of the horses settled, and was working on a third, that had spooked at the thunder, talking to it in a low, continuous voice, the way some men talk to frightened animals, and some men couldn't. He was one of the ones who could. Lila stood just inside the barn door, catching her breath. The rain on the roof was loud enough to make ordinary conversation difficult. Cobb disappeared to check the feed storage at the far end, with the instinct of a man who knew when 3 was a crowd. Troy got the horse settled, turned around, saw her properly soaked, breathing hard, her hair pulled loose from its pins by the wind, and crossed to her without hesitation. He stripped off his outer coat and put it around her shoulders before she could protest or accept, and the warmth of it hit her so immediately and so completely after the cold that she had to close her eyes for a second. "I'm all right," she said. "I know," he said. He didn't move away. They were very close in the way of a space that had been made smaller by weather and noise and the particular compressed intimacy of a barn in a storm. She was aware of him the way she was aware of things she was working to remain practical about. "Cobb found 2 more post checks on the south line," she said, because talking about practical things was the most efficient method of remaining practical. "I know," he said. "He told me this morning." "We have the documentation." "Lila." His voice was quiet under the rain. She looked at him. "You've been here 5 days," he said. "You've reorganized my books, found 2 separate schemes I didn't know existed, built a relationship with my ranch hand, walked into the county commissioner's office, and walked back out with a formal inquiry in progress." He looked at her with the open, unguarded expression she'd been seeing more frequently, the one she'd been declining to catalog. "I need to say something." "You don't have to." I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. He held her eyes. I told myself this was a practical arrangement, a transaction. I told myself that right up until the moment I watched you talk to Forsyth, and I thought... He stopped. Started again. I thought I don't deserve her. Not because I've done anything wrong. Just because some things are better than what you've earned, and you know it when you see it. She was very still. Outside, the storm said everything it had come to say and kept saying it. The horses shifted and settled. Cobb was somewhere at the far end of the barn, being Cobb, which meant being exactly as present as needed, and not 1 degree more. Troy, she said. You don't have to say anything back, he said quickly. That's not why I said it. I know, she said. But I'm going to say something anyway. She looked at him directly the way she looked at everything, without flinching, without decoration. I stopped thinking of this as a transaction somewhere around day 2. I didn't say so because I wasn't sure what to replace that word with. She paused. I'm still not entirely sure, but I know that when Radnor looked at me yesterday, my first thought wasn't about the land claim, or the ledger, or the legal strategy. She held his eyes. My first thought was, he is not going to take something that is mine. Troy was very still. The ranch, she said steadily. I meant the ranch. Did you? He said. She held the gaze 1 beat longer than was purely informational. I'm working on being honest about the rest of it, she said. Give me a little more time. He looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, take all the time you need. The storm moved on eventually the way storms do, leaving behind a quiet that felt like something earned. They walked back to the house in the dark, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and neither of them moved away, and neither of them said anything about it. But the distance between what had been a transaction and what was becoming something else had closed in the space of one Wyoming storm to something that could no longer be called a distance at all. Galt's notice arrived 4 days after the storm, and it arrived with a change. Lila was the one who opened the post. She'd taken over that task naturally on day 3, because she was already at the table with the documents when the post writer came through, and it made sense. And things that made sense in this household had a way of simply becoming how things were done. She read the notice once, then read it again, then set it on the table in front of Troy's coffee cup, without saying anything, and waited for him to read it himself. He read it. She watched his face. He moved the date up, Troy said. He's coming in 4 days, not 8. Radnor, she said. It wasn't a question. Galt doesn't move dates on his own initiative. He's procedural. Agnes told me that years ago. He does exactly what the schedule says until someone with authority tells him otherwise. Troy set the notice down. Radnor has someone at the territorial office who pushed the date. He wants to catch us unprepared, she said. He wants to catch us before Forsyth's inquiry has time to be formally processed, Troy said. If Galt files his report before the inquiry is on record, the report goes straight to the land board without any county-level flag on it. Lila looked at the notice. Then she looked at Troy. How long does Forsyth's filing take to process? Normally a week minimum. We have 4 days, she said. Yes. She stood up. I need to go back to Forsyth today. Lila. Not to push him, she said, already moving toward her coat. To make sure he knows the timeline has changed. A man like Forsyth files things correctly and assumes the system operates on schedule. He doesn't know Radnor moved the date because Radnor's not supposed to be able to move the date. She turned at the doorway. He needs to know what we know. Then it's his decision. Troy looked at her for a moment. Then he stood up and reached for his own coat. I'll ride with you. You need to stay here, she said. If Radnor has eyes on this property, and he does, he needs to see you on your land working at not gone to town on a Tuesday morning looking anxious. She met his eyes. Normal. Everything normal. He didn't like it. She could see that clearly. He was a man who'd spent 4 years fighting this battle, and the instinct to move to act to be present at every front simultaneously was written into his posture. But he understood strategy because he was smarter than his frustration, and so he put the coat back on the hook. "Take Cobb with you," he said. "Cobb needs to ride the south fence," she said. "I'll be back before noon." She was out the door before he could propose a third option. Forsyth was already at his desk when she arrived, which meant he'd been there for a while, which meant he was a man who worked early, which meant he was the kind of man she could work with. She put the notice on his desk without preamble. He read it. His expression did something careful and contained which told her the date change meant as much to him as it had to her. "This was processed through Harlan Webb at the territorial office," Forsyth said, reading the notice header. "Webb is—" He stopped. "Radnor's," she said. Forsyth looked up at her. "I was going to say Webb is someone whose appointment I've had concerns about for some time." He set the notice down. "But your word is more efficient." "Can you accelerate the inquiry filing?" she said. "What I filed yesterday is already on record," he said. "The question is whether it's formally processed before Galt submits his report." He picked up a pen and turned it once in his hand. "If Galt submits before the inquiry is logged, and Webb is managing the logging timeline at that office, the report could be reviewed and acted on before our flag reaches it." "So Webb controls the sequence," she said. "Webb controls the inbox," Forsyth said, "which in bureaucratic terms is the same thing." She sat down without being invited, because the problem required sitting with and standing felt wrong for thinking. Forsyth watched her, but didn't comment on it. "Is there a mechanism," she said slowly, "to file the inquiry directly with the land board bypassing the territorial office intake?" Forsyth was quiet for a moment. "There is a provision for county direct filing in cases of suspected procedural interference," he said. "It's rarely used. It requires the county commissioner to attest formally that standard filing channels may be compromised." "Can you do that?" "I can," he said, "if I'm willing to put my name to a statement that implies the territorial office intake process is being manipulated, which is a significant professional claim." "I know," she said. He looked at her. She held the look and didn't fill the silence with reassurance or argument, because she understood that some decisions needed to be made without anyone pushing, and this was his to make. "Let me see the notice again," he said. She pushed it across the desk. He read it a second time carefully, and she could see him building the case in his own mind, assembling the pieces the way she'd assembled them on the kitchen table 5 days ago, finding the pattern in the sequence. "The date change was processed through Webb's office yesterday evening," Forsyth said. "After hours. Filed as a routine scheduling adjustment, no authorization signature." He set the paper down. "A routine adjustment processed after hours without authorization signature is technically a procedural irregularity." "Yes," she said. "Which gives me grounds to flag it independently," he said, "without making the larger claim about systemic manipulation." "Just the one irregular document," she said, "which happens to be the document that accelerated Galt's timeline." Forsyth looked at her for a long moment. "How old are you, Mrs. Blackthorne?" 28, she said. He shook his head slightly, not dismissively, almost admiringly, in the restrained way of a man who expressed admiration through understatement. "I'll have the county direct filing processed by end of business today," he said. "Galt will be notified before he arrives that his report is subject to prior county review." "Which means Radnor can't use the report without the review completing first," she said. "Correct." Forsyth stood, which meant the meeting was over. "Go home, Mrs. Blackthorne. Prepare for Galt. He's thorough, and he's not Radnor's man, but he's not your friend either. He'll make up his own mind based on what he sees." "That's all I'm asking for," she said. She was back at the ranch by mid-morning as promised. Troy was at the fence line nearest the house when she rode in, not working the far pastures, she noticed, but close. He'd stayed close. She dismounted and told him everything without sitting down first, because he'd been waiting, and waiting deserved directness. He listened the way he always listened, completely without interrupting, with the stillness of someone for whom attention was not passive. "Forsyth is filing county direct today," she finished. "That puts Radnor's timeline in the mud," Troy said. "It complicates it significantly," she said. "He can still pressure Galt. He can still have Webb try to bury the county filing. But every move he makes now leaves a trail, and he knows that." She paused. "He's going to do something else, something we haven't anticipated." "What makes you think that?" "Because he's not a man who accepts a blocked move," she said. "He pivots. He's been pivoting for 4 years. She looked at Troy directly. "What haven't we protected?" Troy thought. She watched him think, the focused, quiet way he processed without performance. She'd come to trust that quality in him specifically. He didn't pretend to know things he didn't know. "The marriage itself," he said finally. She went still. "We've protected the legal documents," he said. "We've protected the property records, the assessment evidence, the financial pattern. But the marriage, Galt is going to examine it directly. He'll interview us separately. He'll ask questions." He held her eyes. "And we've known each other 8 days. 8 days." She ran it through her mind. 8 days of coffee before sunrise, and ledger books, and barnstorms, and a coat placed around her shoulders, and a conversation in the kitchen that had moved them past transaction into something she still hadn't fully named. 8 days that felt, and she registered this with the precision she applied to everything, considerably longer, fuller, more inhabited than most years she'd lived through. "What would he ask?" she said. "Things a married couple would know," Troy said. "Small things, the kind you don't think to prepare for, because if you're genuinely married you don't need to." He paused. "What I eat for breakfast, what side of the bed I sleep on, what I was doing the night before we met. You eat standing up, and you don't really eat breakfast so much as drink coffee until something requires your attention," she said. "I don't know what side of the bed you sleep on because I've had no occasion to observe it, but the wear pattern on the floorboards on the right side of your room is deeper, so probably right. And the night before we met." She paused. "I don't know. You tell me." He blinked. "You read the floorboards?" "My father taught me to read what people leave behind." She held his gaze. "What were you doing the night before I came?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was sitting on the porch," he said. "I'd spent the day going through every option I had left and finding that I'd run out. I sat outside for about 2 hours and thought about what my father would have done." He paused. "He would have found a way. He always found a way. I went to bed that night telling myself I would too, without having any idea what the way was." She held that. "And then I rode up the next morning." "And then you rode up," he said. The morning was quiet around them. Somewhere across the pasture, Cobb was riding the south line, doing his job with the steady faithfulness of a man who believed in the things he'd decided to believe in. The ranch breathed around them, the particular aliveness of a working property full of small sounds and purposes. "We need to actually prepare," she said. "Not fabricate. Actually learn each other well enough that the truth holds up under direct examination." "How?" "The same way you learn anything," she said. "You ask and you listen and you pay attention." She looked at him. "Tell me something true about yourself, something Galt would have no reason to know to ask, but that a wife would." Troy was quiet for a moment. Then, "I talk in my sleep. Not words, just sounds. My father told me once that I've done it since I was a child. It embarrassed me for years. I stopped sleeping near other people partly because of it." She absorbed this. "Is that why you offered me a room immediately before I asked?" He looked at her. Something moved in his expression. "I hadn't connected those two things," he said slowly. "But yes, probably." "All right," she said. "My turn." She thought for a moment about what was true, and what mattered, and what she'd been carrying long enough that it had become part of the architecture of who she was. "I check exits," she said. "Every room I enter. I find the door, the window, the route out. I've done it since I was about 11. I don't know exactly where it started. I just know that I never feel safe in a room until I know how to leave it. Troy was very still. That's not a small thing, he said quietly. No, she agreed. It's not. Has this house... He stopped. Do you know how to leave every room here? By day 3, she said. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment with the open, careful expression that she'd stopped pretending not to notice. And, he said. She understood the question. And I stopped wanting to use them, she said. That's all I'll say for now. The letter from Haskell arrived that afternoon, and it hit like a second stone thrown at the same window. Cobb brought it in from the post without comment, set it on the table, and stood back with the expression of a man who'd already read the return address and had thoughts about it. Troy opened it, read it, set it down. He's canceling the contract, Troy said. Effective end of month, site's operational changes. Radnor told him to cut us off, Lila said immediately. We got too close to finding the pricing pattern, and now he's eliminating the evidence by ending the relationship. Without Haskell, I need a new buyer for the fall cattle, Troy said. That's not a small problem. The fall sale is the primary income event for the year. Who else in the county buys at volume? She said. Brennan, Troy said. And Alderson. But they both have long-standing arrangements with their own suppliers. Clara Holt's family, she said. The Double H. Clara told me at the church gathering that her brother Martin has been expanding his operation. An expanding operation needs additional supply. Martin Holt is... Troy stopped. He's not Radnor's man, but he avoids conflict with him. He'd be nervous about buying from me. He'd be nervous about buying from you, she said. Would he be nervous about buying from us? Troy looked at her. Let me come with you when you approach him, she said. Clara has already met me. She vouched for us at the gathering. If her brother sees his sister's judgment is behind this relationship... He respects Clara, Troy said. More than he'd like to admit. Then we use that, she said. We go to Martin Holt before Galt arrives. We secure the contract. When Galt comes to review the operation, we have an existing buyer relationship that shows the ranch is commercially active and forward-looking. She picked up the Haskell letter and held it. Radnor thinks cutting Haskell hurts us. Let him. We'll have replaced him before he realizes it. Cobb, who had been standing in the doorway this entire time, said, I'll get the horses ready for tomorrow morning. Thank you, Cobb, Lila said. He disappeared. Troy looked at her. You think fast. I've been in situations where slow was losing, she said. It teaches you. They rode to the Holt ranch the next morning and found Martin Holt exactly where Clara had predicted in his barn, working through a problem with his feed supply that was making him irritable. He was a thicker, less sharp version of his sister, with her same eyes, but less of whatever it was behind them that made Clara dangerous in a room. He looked at Troy with the careful wariness of a man maintaining multiple neutralities. He looked at Lila differently. She introduced herself directly, shook his hand like a man would, and told him plainly that they were looking for a buyer for fall cattle and had heard his operation was expanding. She gave him the numbers, head count, quality timeline, without decoration. She watched his wariness shift by degrees from careful to calculating, which was progress. I've had the same supplier for years, he said. We know, she said. We're not asking you to end a relationship. We're asking you to consider a supplementary arrangement for the additional volume your expansion requires. She paused. Your current supplier can't cover the increase. That's why you've been at reduced stock levels in the North Pasture for 2 seasons. Martin Holt stared at her. How do you know about my North Pasture? Clara mentioned it, she said, which was true. She's proud of what you're building. She talks about the ranch. She met his eyes. The question is whether the expansion actually happens or stays a plan. That depends on whether you can secure enough supply to make the numbers work. He was quiet. Troy was quiet. Lila let the quiet exist because pressure at this moment would cost more than it gained. "What terms?" Martin said finally. She gave him terms. He countered. She adjusted once on a point she'd already decided she'd give on and held everything else. It took 20 minutes. At the end of it, Martin Holt extended his hand and said, "Draft the contract. I'll sign it." On the way back, Troy said, "You gave him the North Pasture detail." "He needed to feel that I knew something real," she said. Men like Martin Holt trust specificity. Generalities make them feel like they're being managed, but a specific fact that lands differently. "And the counteroffer," Troy said. "You expected it." "I built room for it," she said. "The first number I gave him was 10% high. The thing I conceded was already outside what I needed." She glanced at him. "Never make the other person feel like they lost, even when they did." Troy rode in silence for a moment. Then, "Where did you learn negotiation?" "Watching my father sell corn to buyers who had more leverage than he did," she said. "He wasn't a natural at it. He'd come home from those conversations angry at himself. I'd think about what he should have done differently." She paused. "He taught me the principles without knowing he was teaching me." Troy looked at her with the expression she'd stopped cataloging and started simply receiving the one that meant she had reached something in him that most things didn't reach. "He gave you everything he had," Troy said, "even the parts he didn't mean to give." She looked ahead at the road. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's exactly what he did." Galt arrived on a Wednesday 2 days before they'd expected him, which was Radnor's final attempt to land them off balance. Lila was alone in the house. Troy was with Cobb in the east pasture. She heard the horses 2 this time, not 4, and she was at the door before the knock. Galt was exactly what she'd assembled from Troy's description. Compact, precise, the posture of a man who took his official capacity seriously without theater. He looked at her with mild professional surprise, the look of someone who expected to wait, and instead found the door already open. "Mrs. Blackthorne," he said. "Mr. Galt," she said. "You're early. Please come in." She said it without hesitation, without the slight over-brightness that would signal she was performing ease rather than feeling it. She said it the way she'd say it to anyone expected a simple, grounded welcome. She'd practiced the exact tone of it in her head for 3 days, and then that morning had decided to stop practicing and simply mean it. She put coffee in front of him and his recorder both. She sent the stable boy for Troy. She sat down across from Galt with her hands folded and waited. "You're not nervous," he said. "I have nothing to be nervous about," she said. "My husband's ranch is sound. Our records are in order. We're glad you're here. The sooner the claim is verified, the sooner everyone can stop wasting time on it." Galt looked at her for a moment. "Most people in your position would at least appear nervous." "Most people in my position haven't spent the past 10 days reviewing every document on this property," she said. "I know what's here. I'd be nervous if I didn't." Something shifted slightly in Galt's expression, not warmth, more like recalibration. She recognized it. She'd been causing it in people for 10 days straight. Troy came through the door, and the first thing he did, the very first thing before he looked at Galt or his recorder or anyone else in the room, was look at her. She gave him the smallest nod. She watched the tension in his shoulders drop by a precise, controlled amount. Galt saw it. She knew he saw it because his pen moved on his pad in the quick noting way of a man recording a data point. Good. Let him record it. It was the most genuine thing in the room. "Mr. Blackthorne," Galt said, and the interview began. He separated them after the first hour, as expected. Lila went to the kitchen. Galt's recorder stayed with Troy. Galt came to Lila. He asked about the property boundaries. First she answered from memory, and from the maps she'd reviewed, until she could draw them freehand. He asked about the livestock. She gave him numbers she'd counted herself because she'd gone and counted them on day 6 specifically so she'd know. He asked about the household routine, the daily work, the improvements made to the property since her arrival. Then he asked, "Tell me something about your husband that isn't in any document." She looked at him. He looked back. This was the question. She recognized it the way you recognize a test disguised as conversation. "He talks in his sleep," she said. "Not words. Just sounds a kind of low murmur. I heard it the first night through the wall between our rooms." She paused. "He doesn't know that I know. I haven't told him because he's clearly self-conscious about it. He mentioned once, without context, that he prefers sleeping near no one." I understood what he meant. She held Galt's gaze. "It doesn't bother me. It sounds like someone working through something even in sleep. That seems right for the man he is." Galt wrote something. She waited. "You've been here 10 days, he said. 11 as of this morning, she said. That's a short time to know a person." "It is," she agreed. "It's also long enough to know whether you're building something real or building a performance. Those feel different. I know which one this is." "And which one is it?" She looked at him without hesitation. "Real," she said. "Harder and less comfortable and more worth it than anything I've done in a long time. Real." Galt was quiet for a moment. He looked at his notes. Then he looked up at her one last time with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with having made it. "I've received notice from Commissioner Forsyth's office," he said. "The county direct filing." "Yes," she said. "You know about it." "I helped assemble the documents that informed it," she said. Galt nodded once slowly. "My report will reflect what I observe," he said. "I want you to understand that. Not what Radnor wants me to find. Not what Forsyth wants me to confirm. What I observe." "That's all I've ever asked for," she said. He stood. She stood. He extended his hand, which was not, she sensed, something he did automatically or often. She shook it. "You've made a home here, Mrs. Blackthorne," he said. "In 11 days. That's not nothing." She watched him go to find Troy, and she stood in the kitchen of a ranch that had been a stranger's property 2 weeks ago, and she understood with the full, quiet certainty of something that had been becoming true for days, and had finally finished becoming. That home was no longer a place she was working toward. She was already in it, and she intended with every practical and emotional and stubborn fiber of who she was to keep it. Galt left without telling them what his report would say, which was exactly what a fair man would do, and exactly what made the waiting unbearable. Troy watched the horses disappear down the road and stood on the porch for a long moment, with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who had just done everything he could, and arrived at the specific, uncomfortable border where effort ended and outcome began. Lila stood beside him. She didn't fill the quiet with reassurance, because reassurance at this stage would have been dishonest, and dishonest things between them had a short shelf life. "He's going to file a clean report," she said finally. "You can't know that," Troy said. "I can make a reasonable assessment," she said. "He shook my hand when he left. He didn't have to do that." Troy looked at her. "He shook your hand." "He's a man who extends that courtesy when he's decided something favorable," she said. "He didn't extend it to you. No offense." Troy almost smiled. Almost. None taken. They went inside. Cobb appeared at the kitchen door 10 minutes later with the expression of a man who had been waiting with considerable patience for a report. "Well," he said. "We wait," Lila said. Cobb absorbed this. "How long?" "A week," she said. "Maybe less." She put the kettle on. "In the meantime, we work. Normal. Everything normal." Cobb looked at Troy. Troy nodded once. Cobb went back to work. Normal lasted exactly 2 days. On the third morning after Galt's visit, Lila found Cobb at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, which was not where Cobb ever was at 6 in the morning. He was sitting with both hands flat on the table and the expression of a man delivering something he'd rather not deliver. "Talk," she said, and sat down. "Radnor's man was at the Brennan place yesterday evening," Cobb said. "One of the hands from the south spread I know him by sight. He spent about an hour there and left before dark." Lila set down her cup. "Radnor found out about the Holt contract. Or he's guessing that we replaced Haskell and he's checking," Cobb said. "Either way, he's working the neighbors now, trying to close us off before Galt's report lands." "Martin Holt signed the contract," she said. "That's done." "Brennan hasn't," Cobb said. "And if Radnor gets to Brennan before we do—" She was already standing. "Where's Troy?" "North fence." She went to find him. Dead. He was checking the water line when she reached him, and she told him about the Brennan situation without slowing her walk, because she'd learned that Troy processed information better in motion than at rest. Something about keeping his hands occupied freed up the rest of him. "Brennan and I have known each other 15 years, Troy said. "He's not Radnor's man." "He doesn't have to be Radnor's man to be pressured by him," she said. "A man who wants to stay out of trouble is just as useful to Radnor as a man who's actively working for him." She looked at Troy directly. "Radnor doesn't need Brennan's loyalty. He just needs Brennan's silence." Troy was quiet. They kept walking. "What does Brennan need?" she said. Troy thought. "He's been trying to get his northern grazing section certified for the county agricultural cooperative for 2 years. There's a board member who's been blocking it. Small grievance, old politics." He paused. "He doesn't talk about it much, but it bothers him. It's a matter of respect as much as money." She filed it. "Who's the board member?" "Man named Ferris Dodd." She stopped walking. Troy took 2 more steps before he registered she'd stopped and turned back. "Ferris Dodd," she said. "County Agricultural Board," Troy said. "He's been on it." "Ferris Dodd witnessed our marriage," she said. "He is the least warm human being I have encountered in this territory. But he was correct and efficient, and he does not strike me as a man who enjoys carrying someone else's agenda." She looked at Troy. "Why is he blocking Brennan's certification?" Troy shook his head. "I assumed it was just old politics. Dodd being difficult." "Old politics is never just old politics," she said. "There's always a reason underneath it." She paused. "I want to talk to Dodd." "Lila." "Not about the certification, not directly." She was already thinking through it. "Just a conversation. I want to understand what the actual obstruction is, if it's Radnor's hand in that too. Then Radnor's been suppressing Brennan's interests for years while keeping Brennan just satisfied enough not to push back," Troy said slowly. "Keeping him frustrated but manageable," she said. "A man who has one grievance that never gets resolved is a man who's too preoccupied with that grievance to look at the bigger picture." She met Troy's eyes. "Radnor manages people the way a bad landlord manages tenants. Just enough pressure to keep them in place. Never enough to make them leave and make noise on their way out." Troy stared at her. "You got all of that from one name." "I got all of that from watching my father's bank do it for 8 months," she said. "Different county, same method." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "We ride to Dodd this afternoon. Together this time." "Together," she agreed. Ferris Dodd received them with the same blank efficiency he'd shown at the marriage counter. A man whose professional face had been installed young and required no adjustment for different situations. He looked at Lila, then at Troy, then at Lila again, with a fractional shift of expression that might have been in a more demonstrative man's surprise. "Mrs. Blackthorne," he said. "Mr. Blackthorne, this isn't a scheduled appointment." "It's a conversation," Lila said. "We won't take much of your time." She asked about the cooperative certification process, broadly procedurally, nothing that would flag as a specific inquiry about Brennan. She asked how obstruction to certification typically arose, what grounds were legitimate, what documentation resolved disputes. Dodd answered with the rote precision of someone who knew procedure, the way some people knew scripture. Then she asked, "Is there currently any certification review that's been outstanding for longer than the standard resolution period?" Dodd paused. A very small pause, but there. "There may be one or two," he said. "In this county," she said. "That information is part of the public agricultural record," he said carefully. "You could review it at the county office." "I'd rather hear it from you," she said. "If there's a certification that's been incorrectly held, that's a problem for the board's accountability record. I'm sure that's something you'd want to resolve proactively, rather than have raised in another context." Another pause. Longer. "There is one outstanding certification," Dodd said. "The Brennan North section. It's been held pending additional documentation." "What documentation?" Troy said. Dodd opened a drawer. He took out a folder. He looked at it for a moment in the way of a man deciding something. The original hold was placed on a request from... He stopped. A board member who cited drainage concerns. "Which board member?" Lila said. Dodd set the folder down. "Mrs. Blackthorne, I've been on this board for 11 years, he said, and his voice had shifted not warmer, but more direct, the underneath of the man coming through the procedural surface. "I know when a hold is legitimate and when it isn't. This one isn't. It hasn't been for about 2 years." "Then why is it still there?" she said. "Because I was waiting for the correct moment and the correct mechanism to remove it without creating more problems than I solved," he said flatly. A hold removed suddenly without explanation raises questions. A hold resolved through proper documentation review does not. He looked at her. "What's your interest in the Brennan property?" "We have a business relationship with Martin Holt," she said. "Martin and Brennan run adjacent operations. If Brennan's certification goes through, his capacity increases, which has positive downstream effects for the whole valley." She paused. "And because the same person who placed the hold on Brennan's certification has been systematically working against the Blackthorn Ranch for 4 years, and I am extremely interested in anything that documents the reach of that pattern." Dodd looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Troy. He looked back at Lila. "If the hold were resolved through a documentation review completed in, say, the next 72 hours, he said carefully, "Brennan would receive his certification within the week. That would be the correct procedural outcome," she said. "Yes," Dodd said, "it would." He picked up the folder and set it in a different tray on his desk. She recognized the significance of the tray's position, active review, not storage. She'd been watching his desk organization since they sat down. "Thank you for your time," she said. "I'm not doing you a favor," Dodd said with the precision of a man who wanted that point clear. "I'm correcting an error that should have been corrected 2 years ago." "I know," she said. "That's why I came to you." Outside, Troy let out a breath that he'd apparently been holding for most of that conversation. "You knew he'd do it," he said. "I thought he might," she said. "He's a procedural man with a long memory and a sense of his own board's integrity. He didn't need convincing. He needed permission." Permission from who? From someone who could give him a legitimate mechanism to fix it without looking like he was taking a side. She glanced at him. "We gave him that." Troy shook his head slowly. "And now Brennan gets his certification, which means Brennan is no longer nursing a grievance that Radnor's been using to keep him distracted. And when Radnor's man shows up to pressure Brennan, she said, Brennan is going to have just received news that a problem he's carried for 2 years has been resolved. And the timing is going to tell its own story about who his actual neighbors are." Troy stopped walking. He turned to face her fully. "You're 3 moves ahead of everyone," he said. 2, she said. "Maybe 2.5. I can't always see the third clearly." "That's more than I've managed in 4 years of fighting this alone," he said. and the weight in his voice when he said it was not self-pity, it was honest accounting, and she'd come to know the difference. "You weren't built to fight this kind of fight," she said. "You're built for the land, for the cattle and the water and the long work. That's not a weakness, it's what makes the ranch worth fighting for." She looked at him directly. "I'm built for the other part. That's what makes us—" She paused. "Makes us what?" he said quietly. She held his gaze. "Functional," she said. The word was deliberate understatement, and they both knew it. The side of his mouth moved in the direction of something that wasn't quite a smile, and wasn't quite not one. "Functional," he repeated. "For now," she said, and started walking. Galt's report arrived on a Friday morning, and it didn't come the way she'd expected. It didn't come as a letter. It came as Forsyth riding up the road himself at 8 in the morning with his good coat on, and a look on his face that she read from 30 feet away before he'd said a single word. She read it as good news and was already putting the kettle on before he dismounted. He came in, sat down, accepted coffee with both hands in the way of a man who'd been on horseback since early, and felt it. Troy came in from the back, registered Forsyth's presence, and stopped in the doorway. "The report," Troy said. "Filed yesterday evening," Forsyth said. "Clean. Full verification of the homestead claim. Continuous residence working improvements evidence of genuine settlement." He paused. His language specifically notes, and I'm reading directly, "The household presents clear evidence of an established and committed domestic arrangement with records management and property maintenance that exceed the standard threshold for verification purposes." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's Galt's way of saying she impressed him," Cobb said from the back doorway, where he had appeared with the uncanny timing he always had for significant moments. "It's over," Troy said. His voice was careful, like a man testing ice. "The claim is verified," Forsyth said. "Radnor can file an appeal, but it would go to the full land board for review, and given the county direct filing I submitted, which is now formally on record alongside Galt's report, any appeal would trigger an independent audit of all interference claims." He set his coffee down. "In my professional assessment, Radnor is not going to file an appeal." Troy sat down. He sat down like a man whose legs have decided that standing is no longer the priority. Lila watched him and felt something move through her that was both his relief and her own braided together in a way that she was done pretending was simple. "He's going to come at us differently now," she said. "He doesn't have the legal mechanism anymore, so he'll go personal, or financial." Forsyth looked at her. "You're correct, and I want you to be prepared for that." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "This came across my desk yesterday, filed as a routine creditor inquiry. Someone is pulling the historical debt records on the Everett estate." He set the paper on the table. She looked at it. Her father's name, her father's farm, the debt that had taken everything. "He's looking for something he can use against me personally," she said. Her voice was steady, because she made it steady, because the alternative was letting him see that it had reached something, and she was not going to let Warren Radnor reach anything in her that she hadn't already made peace with. "What's in those records?" Troy asked, and his voice had gone quiet in the specific way it went quiet when something mattered enormously to him. "Debt," she said simply. "My father's debt, which I knew about, which I told you about on the first day." She looked at Troy directly. "There's nothing in those records that I haven't already told you." "That's not the point," Troy said. "The point is that he's going after your family." "He's going after what he thinks I'm ashamed of," she said. "That's how men like him operate. They look for the wound, and they press it." She picked up the paper and looked at it. "My father worked that land for 22 years and lost it to circumstances that were largely not his fault. There's no shame in that record. There's only grief." She set it down. "Radnor can publish it in the county paper if he likes. It won't change a single thing about who I am or what I've built here." The kitchen was quiet. Forsyth looked at her with the expression she'd seen once before on his face, the understated, almost reluctant admiration of a man who didn't give that out freely. "He's also," Forsyth said, "been making inquiries about the speed of your marriage, specifically whether there are grounds to claim it was contracted under false pretense that both parties knowingly entered a fraudulent arrangement." "We entered it honestly," Troy said sharply. "You entered it under duress," Forsyth said carefully. "That's a distinction Radnor's attorney will try to make matter." "Duress for both of us," Lila said. "I had nowhere to go. He had a deadline. We were both honest about that from the first minute." She paused. "The question is whether the marriage is genuine now, and Galt just answered that question on the public record." Forsyth looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. He did. He finished his coffee and stood. "I'll keep monitoring what comes out of Radnor's camp, but I want you to know the ground has shifted. He's on the defensive for the first time in 4 years." He put on his hat. "Don't get comfortable, but don't misread what's happened here. You've done something that a lot of people in this valley thought wasn't possible." He left. The kitchen held the three of them, Lila, Troy, Cobb, at the doorway. Cobb said, "I'll go check the south fence," and disappeared with the tact of a man who'd spent 6 years reading rooms. She was at the table with the Holt contract paperwork when Troy came to stand in the kitchen doorway, and simply stood there for a moment not speaking, which was unusual enough that she looked up. "What?" she said. He came in and sat down. Not across from her, beside her. Close enough that she was aware of him, the way she was aware of the fire in the stove, a consistent, reliable warmth that she'd stopped noticing the specific presence of because it had become part of the room's baseline. "My father built this ranch for 40 years, he said. "He fought 2 droughts, a cattle epidemic, 3 bad winters, and a property dispute with a neighbor that went on for a decade." He was looking at the table, not her. "He used to say the land rewards the people who refuse to leave it. I believe that. I've been betting everything on it for 7 years. He paused. "What I didn't know was that the land can't fight a man like Radnor alone. The land is just land. It needs people to be worth anything." She waited. "I needed you," he said. "Not the arrangement, not the homestead claim, not the deadline. I needed you specifically. What you did in that office with Forsyth. What you did with Dodd. What you said to Galt." He looked at her. "I've been thinking about what you told me about checking exits. Every room you enter." She went still. "Have you stopped?" he said. "Here. In this house." She looked at him. The honest answer moved in her before she gave it shape. "I still check," she said. "But I stopped wanting to use them around day 5. She paused. "And now?" She stopped. "Now," he said quietly. "Now I check out of habit," she said. "Not out of need. The difference is..." She pressed her lips together for a moment. "The difference is that I know the exits, but I'm not planning for them. I'm planning for everything that happens in between." He was looking at her with the open, unguarded expression she'd been receiving for days, and had decided somewhere in the last 48 hours to stop managing her response to. It was a decision that had frightened her a little, and felt right in the particular way that frightening right things felt. "Lila," he said. "I know," she said. "I haven't said anything yet." "I know what you're going to say," she said, "because I've been thinking the same thing for about a week and trying to decide when it stopped being too soon." She turned to face him properly, and the thing she'd been carrying since somewhere around day 5, the thing she'd been keeping in the safe, practical part of herself and labeling as not yet, was suddenly simply present. "I love this ranch," she said. "I love the work and the problem and the fight and the creek and the fence lines and every crooked entry in that ledger." She held his eyes. And I love the man who built it and kept it and was honest with me from the first minute, even when honesty was not in his interest." She said it straight, without decoration, without asking for anything back. "That's what I've been working up to saying." Troy didn't look away. He didn't fill the silence immediately, which was right. It needed a moment, that kind of sentence. It needed to be real before it was answered. "I fell in love with you," he said on day 2. "When you told Radner to his face that you had nothing to be nervous about and meant it." He said it with the plain directness of a man who had been precise about things his whole life and was being precise about this. "I didn't say it because I didn't want to press. Because you came here without options, and I didn't want you to think what you felt was obligation." "It's not obligation," she said. "I know that now," he said. "I knew it when you told me in the barn." "And the ranch," she said. "It wasn't a challenge. It was an honest question, the kind that mattered. Not just me, the whole of it. Is that what you want?" He looked at her with an expression so certain and so clear that it answered the question before his words did. "It was always the ranch," he said. "Now it's the ranch and you. The order matters less than the fact that both are true." He reached across the table and took her hand. Not tentative, not careful, certain. The hand of a man who had made his decision and was done qualifying it. "I want to ask you something." "Ask it," she said. "We married because we had to," he said. "I want to marry you because I choose to. Not in Dodd's office with a clock running. Here, on this land, with the people who've watched us build this." His thumb moved across her hand. "Will you?" She looked at him. She felt the full, undefended weight of everything: the Tuesday morning, the $11, the borrowed horse, the name signed with a 1-second pause, and she felt where it had led, and she felt the particular earned certainty of a woman who had checked every exit and chosen completely and deliberately to stay. "Yes," she said, one word. No qualification, no management, no protective distance. Just yes, the way she'd said it the first time, but larger, truer. Said by a woman who knew now exactly what she was choosing. He pulled her to him, and she let herself be pulled, and neither of them said another word for a while, and the ranch was quiet around them, and outside the land stretched in every direction, documented and verified and holding, and the creek ran clean through the northeast corner, carrying water that was going to keep running for as long as people who refused to leave it were there to protect it. Cobb came back from the south fence 2 hours later, read the kitchen from the doorway in one glance, and said to the empty yard, "About time," with the satisfaction of a man whose patience has been justified. Then he went to check on the horses, because that was useful, and Cobb believed in useful things. Radner moved on a Monday, and he moved faster than either of them had expected. The letter arrived before breakfast, not through the post, delivered by hand, which meant someone had ridden through the night to place it at the gate before dawn. Cobb found it, brought it in without a word, set it on the table between the coffee cups, and stood back. Troy read it first. She watched his face the way she always watched his face, precisely without appearing to. She saw the controlled stillness. Then she saw what was underneath it, which was not fear. It was something colder and more dangerous than fear. He slid it across to her without speaking. It was from Radner's attorney, formal language dense with legal phrasing, but the substance was simple and brutal, a challenge to the marriage on grounds of fraudulent inducement filed with the territorial court, citing a sworn affidavit from a witness who claimed to have overheard a conversation between Troy Blackthorne and an unnamed party in which Troy stated explicitly that he intended to use a convenience marriage to satisfy the homestead requirement without genuine domestic intent. A sworn affidavit. A witness. "Who?" Troy said. "Someone Radner owns," Lila said. "The affidavit is dated last week, which means Radner had this prepared before Galt's report came back. He knew the report might go against him, and he had this ready as a secondary move." She set the letter down. "The witness is irrelevant. The affidavit is what matters, and affidavits can be challenged." "It's filed with the territorial court," Troy said. That means it goes above Forsyth's authority. Yes, she said. But Galt's report is also on the territorial record, and Forsyth's county direct filing. Radnor is stacking paper against paper and hoping the territorial judge assigned to this is someone he can work. How do we find out who the judge is? I'll go to Forsyth, she said. Right now. She was at the door before Troy had pushed back his chair. He caught up with her at the horses. She didn't tell him to stay this time, and he didn't offer to. Forsyth was already at his desk, and already had a copy of the filing when they arrived, which meant he'd been notified through his own channels before they'd woken up, which meant he'd been waiting for this move. Sit down, he said, and his voice had an edge to it she hadn't heard before. Not anger, the contained energy of a man who has been patient for a long time and has finally decided to be done with patience. You knew this was coming, Troy said. I suspected he had something in reserve, Forsyth said. I didn't know the specific mechanism. He picked up his copy of the filing. The affidavit claims a witness overheard you Blackthorn at the feed store in town approximately 3 weeks ago, stating that you planned to use a legal marriage to satisfy the homestead requirement. 3 weeks ago, I was already married, Troy said. Forsyth looked at him. Yes, I noticed that. The date on the affidavit is fabricated, Lila said. The date on the affidavit is provably impossible, Forsyth said with the precise emphasis of a man who appreciated that distinction. 3 weeks ago, you were on record as a married man. A conversation about planning a future marriage would make no sense. Any territorial judge worth his appointment will see that immediately. He set the paper down. The question is whether the judge assigned to this is worth his appointment. Who is it? She said. Forsyth looked at her steadily. Judge Calloway, out of Cheyenne. The name sat on the table. She waited to see if it meant something to Troy. From his expression, it didn't. Calloway and Radnor have no known relationship, Forsyth said. He's not Radnor's man. He's also not known for being fast. He folded his hands. A challenge like this in Calloway's court will take months to come to hearing, which means Radnor isn't trying to win this in court. She heard it before Forsyth finished the sentence. He's trying to create uncertainty, she said. A pending legal challenge on the marriage means the homestead claim is in a gray area again. Banks won't extend operating credit against a contested property. Buyers get nervous. Employees look for more stable work. She looked at Troy. He can't take the land directly anymore, so he's making the land difficult to use. That's exactly what he's doing, Forsyth said. Troy's jaw was tight. How do we fight a strategy designed to cost us time? You collapse the timeline, Lila said. Both men looked at her. The affidavit has a fatal flaw. The date makes it impossible. If we can get a motion filed for immediate dismissal on those grounds, we don't wait for the hearing. We force a ruling on the flaw itself. That requires an attorney, Forsyth said. Do we know one, she said. Someone not affiliated with any of Radnor's existing relationships. Forsyth was quiet for a moment. There's a woman in Laramie, he said, and said it with the particular care of someone selecting a word they know will be unexpected. Margaret Ennis. She passed the territorial bar 4 years ago. She's the only female attorney practicing in Wyoming. She's extremely good, and Radnor has never bothered to establish a relationship with her because he didn't think she was worth cultivating. The edge of Lila's mouth moved. His mistake. His consistent mistake, Forsyth said, and looked directly at her when he said it. They sent a telegram to Margaret Ennis that afternoon. Her response came the following morning in 14 words. Affidavit date is fatal defect. Motion for dismissal ready. Thursday, retainer enclosed herein. The retainer she named was significant. Lila went to the ranch accounts without discussion, looked at the numbers, looked at the Holt contract, figure, looked at the operating reserve she'd built by renegotiating 2 supply arrangements in the past week, and wrote the draft. Troy, standing behind her, watched her write it. That's most of the reserve, he said. It's the cost of ending this quickly, instead of bleeding through it slowly, she said. Which would cost more? He didn't argue. She'd noticed in the past 2 weeks that he'd stopped arguing about financial decisions that she'd clearly already calculated from 6 directions. It wasn't deference. It was the specific trust of a man who has seen enough evidence to know when someone is better positioned than he is and has made peace with it. She respected him more for it, not less. "Send it," he said. She sent it. The twist came on Wednesday, and it came from a direction nobody had been watching. Haskell came to the ranch. Not Radnor, not a lawyer, not a threatening letter. Haskell himself in his own wagon alone, arriving at midday, with the expression of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say so many times it had lost its shape. Cobb came to find Lila. "You should probably be the one to handle this," he said, which told her everything about what Cobb thought of the situation. She went out. Haskell was a broad man in his 50s, with hands like fence posts, and the look of someone whose natural state was blunt, and who had spent the past few weeks being required to be subtle, which had not agreed with him. "Mrs. Blackthorne," he said. "Mr. Haskell," she said. "Can I get you something?" "No." He turned his hat in his hands. "I need to say something, and I'd rather say it once and be done." "All right," she said. "The pricing," he said. "The arrangement with Troy's cattle over the past 3 years?" He looked at the hat in his hands. "I knew it was low. Warren told me to offer it, and I did, because Warren is family, and I was—" He stopped. "I told myself it was business. It wasn't right." She waited. "He's asked me to testify," Haskell said. "In the court matter. About the marriage. He wants me to say, I heard Troy talking about the homestead plan before the wedding." He looked up at her. "I didn't hear that. I was never at the feed store 3 weeks ago. I was in Laramie for a funeral." The silence was very complete. "He asked you to lie," she said. "He asked me to support a document that is already a lie," Haskell said. "Which is the same thing but easier to say yes to if you don't look at it directly." He put his hat back on. "I'm not going to do it. I want you to know that." "Are you willing to say that to someone official?" she said. "In writing?" He looked at her for a moment. "That's why I came here instead of sending a note," he said gruffly. She brought him inside. She put coffee in front of him. She found a piece of paper and she wrote exactly what he'd told her in clear and simple language, and she read it back to him word for word. He listened. He nodded. He signed it with the pen she handed him and the signature of a man who has made a decision that costs him something and has made it anyway. "You understand this may complicate your relationship with Radnor," she said. "Warren and I have been complicated since before you arrived," Haskell said. "I just wasn't honest about it." He stood up. "The pricing for the cattle. I'd like to renegotiate. Going forward if you're willing." She looked at him for a moment. "At market rate," she said. At market rate, he agreed. "Then we're willing," she said. He left. She sat with the signed statement for a moment, feeling the weight of it, not just what it said, but what it meant about the shape of what Radnor had built. A man who would ask his own cousin to commit perjury had run out of legitimate tools. He was down to the dishonest ones, and even those were failing him. She picked up the statement and went to find Troy. "Yeah." Margaret Ennis filed the motion for dismissal on Thursday, as promised, and she filed it with the annotation of a woman who had spent 4 years being underestimated and had turned the experience into fuel. She cited the date, impossibility. She cited Haskell's signed statement confirming the affidavit's witness claim was false. She cited Galt's verification report, Forsyth's county direct filing, and in a move that Lila had not anticipated and admired immediately, she filed a counter-complaint of malicious litigation against Radnor personally. Forsyth sent word by midday. The counter-complaint alone shifted the legal terrain so fundamentally that Radnor's attorney had filed for a continuance by 3 in the afternoon, which was attorney language for, "We need time to reconsider everything." Troy read the update, set it down, looked at Lila. "He's retreating," he said. He's reassessing, she said. Which is not the same as finished. Don't let him see that it's working. How would he see anything? He's in town. He has eyes here, she said. He's always had eyes here. Cobb documented 2 separate riders on the road past the south fence in the past week. She looked at Troy steadily. We act exactly as we've been acting. Working present unbothered. Let him watch that. Troy nodded. Then he said, You've been managing this fight for nearly 3 weeks. We've been managing it, she said. You know what I mean, he said. When does it get to be over for you? When do you get to just... He paused. When do you get to just be here, without it being a strategy? She looked at him. The question reached something she'd been keeping behind the practical, efficient part of herself, the part that had gotten very good at useful things, and had occasionally forgotten that useful wasn't the same as everything. Soon, she said. I think soon. That's not good enough, he said not unkindly. I want a different answer. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something she hadn't planned to say, hadn't prepared, hadn't calculated. I planted seeds in the kitchen garden this morning. Tomatoes and the herb row my mother used to keep. I did it before I even thought about the filing, or the motion, or Radnor. She looked at her own hands. That's probably what soon looks like. When you do something that grows slowly and you're not afraid it'll be taken before it matures. Troy was very still. That's a good answer, he said. It surprised me too, she said. The ceremony was 10 days later on a Saturday with the creek running clean in the background and the whole valley present in a way that would have been unthinkable a month ago. The Brennans came. Martin Holt drove in from the Double H with Clara beside him wearing her good coat and looking like someone who had arranged for this outcome through sheer force of will, which was not entirely inaccurate. Forsyth arrived with the restrained dignity of a man attending something he'd helped make possible without wishing to make a production of that fact. Dodd came, which surprised everyone, including apparently Dodd himself, and stood at the back with the expression of a man fulfilling an obligation he had not entirely explained to himself. Haskell came. That one surprised her. He stood slightly apart from the others with his hat in his hands, and didn't speak to anyone much, and when her eyes met his, briefly across the gathering, he gave her a nod that was simple and direct, and carried with it the complicated weight of a man who had done one right thing after several wrong ones, and was still working out how to carry both. Cobb stood up for Troy in his everyday hat, which he had brushed until it looked as good as it was ever going to look, which she thought was the most Cobb thing he had ever done, and loved him for it. Clara stood with Lila close enough to whisper, "You ready?" "I've been ready since day 2, Lila said. "I just didn't say so." Clara laughed, quiet and real. Sensible woman. Troy was waiting at the edge of the property where it met the creek bank, where the land was most itself, open, honest, without pretense. He turned when she came, and the expression on his face was the full, unguarded version of every look she'd been cataloging and declining to name for 3 weeks. She let herself name it now. Love plain and well lit, on the face of a man who was done being careful about showing it. She walked to him without hesitation. No pause this time. No 1-second wait feeling before she committed. Just forward, because she knew exactly what she was choosing, and she had known for long enough that choosing it quickly was not recklessness, it was certainty. There was no official script. They had agreed on that. Scripts were for situations where you weren't sure what you meant. Troy spoke first. "You came to this land with nothing," he said. "And the first thing you did was make it better. The books, the hinges, the strategy, the fight, all of it. But what I need you to know standing here is that none of that is why I love you." He held her hands, and he held her eyes. "I love you because of the morning you told me you check exits out of habit, but hadn't wanted to use one for days. Because of the way you said my father would have liked the ranch, and your voice did something you didn't intend. Because you signed your name with a 1-second pause that told me you were taking the full weight of what you were choosing, and then you chose it anyway." He stopped. "I love the whole of you, Lila. What you've built here, and what you brought with you, and what's still becoming. All of it. She had prepared nothing. She hadn't trusted herself to prepare something and have it stay honest under the pressure of actually being here with all these people and the creek and his face. So she said what was true. "I came here to survive," she said. "I found something I didn't have a word for until about day 5, and then I had the word and was too careful to say it." She held his hands tighter. "You gave me a roof. You gave me the books and the fight and the work. But what you actually gave me, the thing I'll be paying attention to for the rest of my life, is the first place I've ever been where I stopped planning the exit." She met his eyes. "I don't have an exit plan, Troy. I have a kitchen garden and a spring planting and a cattle contract that runs 3 years and a husband who loves me the way I need to be loved without managing it." Her voice was steady because she meant it completely, and complete meaning has its own steadiness. "I choose you. This land. This life. Every day for as long as I get to." He kissed her there at the edge of the creek with the full valley watching, and nobody pretending not to see it. Clara made a sound of satisfaction. Cobb looked at the sky. Forsyth clasped his hands and allowed himself privately a moment that was more than professional. Haskell at the back of the gathering put his hat on and was quiet, and nobody asked what he was thinking, and that was right. Margaret Ennis's motion was ruled on the following Tuesday. Judge Calloway dismissed Radnor's challenge in its entirety, citing the affidavit's date impossibility as an obvious and fatal defect, and adding in language that was unusually pointed for a judicial ruling that the filing appeared to represent an abuse of court process. The counter-complaint of malicious litigation moved forward as a separate matter. Radnor did not appeal. He came to the ranch 3 weeks after the ruling alone. This time no flanking men, no performance of ease. He tied his horse at the gate himself and walked to the door and knocked like someone who understood that the architecture of their relationship had been fundamentally redesigned. Lila opened the door. She'd seen him coming from the kitchen window and had told Troy with her eyes, and Troy had stayed at the table, which was the right call. "Mrs. Blackthorne," Radnor said. "Mr. Radnor," she said. He looked older than the last time. Not dramatically, just the specific aging that comes when a structure a man has built over years begins to show its actual condition. "I'd like to speak with your husband," he said, "about the water." She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back and held the door. "Come in," she said. He sat across the kitchen table from Troy and Lila both, and he talked about the downstream water access, with the stripped, practical language of a man who has run out of alternatives and knows it. He made no reference to everything that had happened. He asked no forgiveness, and she didn't expect him to. He simply laid out what he needed and asked if there was a conversation to be had. Troy looked at Lila. She gave him the smallest nod. Not permission, she didn't deal in permissions, but confirmation that she agreed with the path he was about to take. "There's a conversation," Troy said. "We'll need it on paper, and we'll need our attorney to review the terms. It won't be the arrangement you wanted, but it'll be a fair one." Radnor looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Lila. She held the look without expression. "All right," he said. He left 20 minutes later with a proposed framework and no illusions about what it represented. Not reconciliation, not trust. A practical arrangement between people who were going to share a valley for the rest of their lives and had decided that the cost of permanent war was no longer worth what either of them could gain from it. Cobb, who had been in the barn during the meeting and came in afterward, said, "How'd it go?" "He backed down," Troy said. "Completely." "Enough," Lila said. Cobb absorbed this. "So it's done." "It's done," she said. The spring came in fast and warm that year, the way Wyoming springs occasionally did when they finally arrived, making up for everything they'd withheld during winter in one sudden, generous rush of green. Lila's kitchen garden came up ahead of schedule. The tomatoes were strong, and the herb row her mother used to keep filled the air around the south wall of the house with something that was both new and entirely familiar, the way good things often are. The Holt contract ran clean through its first quarter. The Brennan relationship, once Martin received his cooperative certification, became something that looked like genuine neighborliness. Dinners, shared fences, helped the particular warmth that comes when people stop being wary of each other and start being useful instead. Clara rode out every week or so, not because she was needed, but because she decided she liked the company, and Lila had decided the same. Forsythe stopped by in April to say that the malicious litigation case against Radnor had been settled privately with terms he described only as significant. He did not elaborate, and she did not press. Some things were better left in the language of results. The territorial review that Forsythe had initiated found irregularities in 3 other homestead challenges besides Blackthorn's. 2 of those families received restitution. The 3rd had already sold and moved on, and that one stayed with her, the family she couldn't reach the damage done before anyone was looking. She kept it as a reminder that arriving in time is not the same as arriving early enough, and that the only useful response to that fact is to keep building things solid enough that the next person doesn't face the same wall. On an evening in late April, she was at the kitchen table with the spring ledger when Troy came in from the east pasture and sat down beside her and put a cup of coffee at her elbow without being asked. She didn't look up from the numbers. He didn't need her to. "What does it say?" he said, meaning the ledger. "It says," she said, finishing the column and setting down the pen, "that this ranch is going to be fine." "Fine," he said. "Better than fine," she said. "I was being conservative." He put his hand over hers on the table. She turned her hand over and held it, and they sat in the kitchen that was hers, and the house that was theirs, and the land that was going to hold, for as long as there were people on it who refused to leave, which was going to be a very long time. Outside, the creek ran through the northeast corner of the property, carrying water downstream, the way it had for 100 years, feeding everything it passed, belonging to nothing, except the land itself, and the people willing to stay and tend it. Lila Blackthorne had come to this place with $11 and nowhere to go, had signed her name with a 1-second pause on a document she had chosen with full knowledge of its weight, and had built out of ledgers and fence hinges and legal filings, and one Wyoming storm, and a kitchen garden planted without fear, a life that was entirely permanently and completely her own. She had not survived it. She had claimed it, and she would keep claiming it every morning for the rest of her long and rooted life, with the certainty of a woman who had finally stopped looking for the exit and started building the door she intended to walk through every single day.